Vivek, thank you so much for talking to ANI. Your first reaction on the allegations and actions by the Canadians that are still unproven in terms of, evidence.
Thanks, Rita. I must say I was absolutely flabbergasted and shocked when I saw this news. It was literally a bombshell thrown by Mr. Trudeau on the first day of the parliamentary session here in Canada, and it was absolutely something unexpected. Because if presumably, if going by what he said, this is something that the Canadian intelligence services have been working on for some time. This was known, presumably was known, and the fact that Trudeau went to the G20 and we know of all of the awkwardness that happened there, something is peculiar about the timing about this announcement. And of course, as you say, the allegations are unproven, but it throws yet another spanner into the works of India-Canada relations, which have been at a low ebb under Mr. Trudeau. His 2018 visit, which we know was more of a Bollywood trunk show than a serious state visit, really was problematic in many ways. And his G20 visit was equally problematic. So at this point, we're sort of in the deep freeze. We're in the Arctic tundra, or as I said in a column I just written, we're on the lunar surface of Mars in terms of the state of the bilateral relationship.
Right. Now, if you listen to the language that we heard earlier today in Canada, there was a stress on words like allegations, if proven wrong. How sure do you think are the Canadians and the intelligence agency in Canada on evidence?
Well, that's a good question, and we really don't know, because we have, the Canadian public, or the public of the world, public of India, has not been shared. We have not been shared this information. So all we know is that Mr. Trudeau alleges this based on what he says he's been told by the Canadian Security Intelligence Agency. And really, it's hard to judge the credibility or the quality of the information until we see more information. But I will say this, this is an unprecedented sort of allegation that in the history of independent India, I can't think of any previous case where the leader of a sort of, so-called Western advanced country, democracy, has said India is interfering in our internal affairs by plotting an assassination. It's absolutely unheard of. So it's extraordinarily peculiar. The timing is strange. And I think lots of questions remain to be asked about what is the evidence? Will it be shared with India? And, the harsh language of the Canadian political establishment on this, all falling in line behind Mr. Trudeau, including opposition parties, I find very interesting and a little bit surprising, to be honest.
Right. Now, if there was evidence of the Indian government's complicity, shouldn't a formal charge be pressed in the international forum? Why do you think this was done the other way, like going public at the first day here at the Parliament?
Well, as your question suggests, that raises very, very important questions about the allegation. If indeed there is credible evidence that India was behind a political assassination in Canada, why did Mr. Trudeau go to the G20 in the first place? And with all of the awkwardness around that visit and the awkward handshake and his skipping the official dinner and so on, why did he go? If these were the concerns about India, and why has it not been shared in a more formal way, as you suggest, through international channels? To me, it smacks of really domestic politics, playing to domestic diaspora politics, which is a big part of the Trudeau playbook. And let's face it, that's been the Trudeau playbook and the playbook of the Liberal Party, of which he's the leader and the Prime Minister, for many, many years.
Right. Now, you talked about, the diaspora politics in Canada, and that's one of the reasons why you see opposition and, the ruling party coming together on this, standing together on this. What do you make of that? And what does the Indian diaspora make of this situation? Somebody who has their roots still very much in India. What's going on there?
Well, it's a very complex situation. The diaspora is not a monolithic entity. There are many disparate groups, but I think, unfortunately, Mr. Trudeau's allegations are going to inevitably pit Sikh Canadians against Hindu Canadians, who are both big parts of the diaspora here, because, you can't generalize and paint with a broad brushstroke on everyone. But for the most part, Sikh Canadians in Canada are relatively critical of India, because most of them I don't quite know what the right word is, at least sympathetic to the Khalistan project, in that many of them would like to see, if peacefully possible, a Khalistan come into being, which is never going to be possible in the context of the Indian Union, which is unbreakable. And whilst many Hindu Canadians, on the most part, are generally sympathetic to India, so you have this tension within the diaspora, and I think Trudeau has sort of thrown a hand grenade into that with these latest allegations. So I think it's going to create a lot of tensions in the community, and really, until he is able to prove the allegations in a way that's convincing, it's going to leave a lot of unanswered questions hanging in the air, basically.
Right. Now, if you talk about this guy who was assassinated, could you give us a little rundown on, who this guy was? Was he there legally? And, by the government coming out and supporting a person like that, what does it mean? Does it give more strength, more power to the Khalistani movement in Canada?
Well, I mean, this chap was certainly not a savory character. He had made several unsuccessful attempts to, by all the records, to migrate to Canada, had been rebuffed. And he was under, had been charge sheeted in Punjab for several very serious terrorist-related activities. And the fact that he was able to get residency and then eventually citizenship of Canada itself is very questionable and problematic. You have to wonder, what are the criteria that Canada is using in deciding who can become a Canadian citizen? So part of the, what's going on, part of the hypocrisy of the Canadian official reaction is they're treating, this chap as some sort of martyr. And it's, of course, it's regrettable that he was killed. There's no excuse for that. Extradition it was. But he was not a nice guy. This was someone who was a committed Khalistani. He was under charge sheet in India for major terrorist offenses, somehow managed to become citizen of Canada, and allegedly, and again, we don't have all of the facts, allegedly used that position to support the Khalistan movement in India. So all of this raises lots of questions for Canada, is how did you let this guy come here in the first place, become a citizen, and use Canada as a base for his propaganda?
Right. Now, what's your impression on how this is going to unfold in the coming days? We've already heard a reaction from India. What is going to happen between the two countries in the coming days? And where do you see the US stand? I mean, do you see Washington supporting a NATO ally, or India, a strategic partner that they're looking for?
No, that's a very good question. So, as you would expect, the tit for tat has begun. So, Canada expelled an Indian envoy, the alleged sort of RAW member of the High Commission, and you can be sure India will expel a Canadian diplomat as a tit for tat, and then in the coming days, I think that's almost a given. I mean, the good news, for what it's worth, is that neither side, I think, wants to break diplomatic relations at this point. I mean, given the huge diaspora presence in Canada, it would be catastrophic. If suppose India and Canada broke diplomatic relations, where would that leave kind of the millions of Indo-Canadians who want to go back to India to visit family and for festivals and holidays and so on. On your broader question, I think this is not going to be registering in any major way with the United States. United States, see, there's a very big difference between Canada and the US when it comes to how they deal with India. Canada sees India not in a strategic geopolitical sort of realpolitik sense. They see India through this diaspora lens of, let's call a spade, the Sikh Canadian vote bank, which for them is very large because their Sikhs are very heavily concentrated in Greater Toronto and Vancouver. So even though their absolute numbers are not large in total in Canada, they're very influential and they're very consequential in key constituencies which can swing an election. In the United States, by contrast, the Indian American diaspora, as they call themselves, are generally pro-India. So, neither Mr. Trump nor Mr. Biden, for that matter, have to play this domestic politics when it comes to India. So I don't think this is going to resonate at all in the U.S. They may make some remarks on it out of courtesy to their allies, Canada. But, it's very clear. I mean, Biden invited Mr. Modi to the U.S. for a major state visit, and Biden was in India, and the chemistry and the rapport, both between Trump and Modi, and Biden-Modi has been very good. So I don't see any change in that bilateral relationship. I think Canada is an insignificant sort of distraction as far as the U.S. is concerned.